an element of being surprised, being illusionary, to look into the lifestyles of your neighbor and to be consequently bitterly jealous because of how they are living their lives. So it's really hard to not be jealous of your neighbor or your friends and to compare yourself to their lifestyles and to want to copy and to want to be successful enough in life to be able to take on that burden, or the burden of copying. When they work on the theater, then they're often bringing to life the things that we see on the streets. And the Shakespeare said that the streets are in fact much more like the theater, and that the people in the public space are actually players on a stage. And this is a very interesting place where, you know, you can decide to not just be the pawn in Shakespeare's valuation of how the society is created through fiction, but you can actually play with that and you can take it on and say, no, I take the player's life as part of my lifestyle, as part of my way to embrace actually this fictioning process. So you can go out into the street and declare yourself even to your fellow neighbor that you are actually a player, you're not really you. And this, you'll be astonished at the startling effect this can have on your neighbor. You know, because the primary objective of talking to your neighbor is to get to know who you're living next door to. But if you get to know that you're actually living next door to a player, somebody who is consciously not taking seriously the identity, then we have a problem. Then we can create a new kind of conflict, a new kind of neighborly conflict, where one neighbor will bring to the other a soup or a casserole or something conciliatory like this. Really, these foodstuffs are designed to be a key into the privacy of the other person. But what do you do if that privacy is actually a space built on fallacy? Then the neighbor gets confused and perturbed. In this evaluatory process where your neighbor is really, you know, looking to understand who you are as a person, but in the end you actually disclose to them, you know, you brush aside the whole small talk thing that a lot of society is built on, you know, to talk about the weather or the food that the neighbor has brought kindly to share with you, maybe to expound on their own culture and lifestyle and habitats. The neighbor wants to be friendly with you. How do they befriend you? Well, by telling you exactly what they're about, what language you are expected to hear when they open the door, what food you're expected to smell coming out of the window when they're cooking. They want to define themselves to you as a kind of peace process. But what do you do when you embrace this Shakespeare's famous thought that life is a stage and the people that live on the life are players, and you make this a conscious part of your lifestyle? Your neighbors, unwittingly, they're not consenting in being part of this fictional relationship, and yet you overcome the barrier. They're in your house. They don't even know if the walls are real. That's the problem with current day, you know, when you're moving through a paradigm shift. It is not a careful procession of time. It is often lurching and unsafe, unsteady. And so when the neighbor comes into the house and you're part of that paradigm shift, and there may be of the older paradigm, there the private becomes public and the schism in history is enacted in the domestic domain. If you are a lover of the arts, then you must know to embrace this fictional, this law of fiction, that it is not only like a nice Elizabethan proverb, but actually a part of society that we are starting to understand is more like a law of physics than a proverb. And when this process begins, it is like a difficult, and they call this process now, they call the reality that we're going towards, they call it a post-truth paradigm. But pay attention to who gives this name post-truth. Is it the people who are participating in the paradigm shift, or is it the members of the older community who want to still grasp onto the idea of essential self and stable identity? They're so scared of losing this ground bedrock. They don't want to open their eyes to the magma that is flowing underneath the solid appearance of the Earth's crust, or your identity's crust, to complete the analogy. The solution is not terribly clear. Wherever there has been a revolution in the past, it has been violent, it has been difficult, full of conflict, so that one is not sure, does the peace, does the ideal, is it worth the imbalance of the peace that is no longer being kept as things are being thrown up in the air? And this is something that the politicians are not working out. It's not something that's being worked out in the G20 summits. No, it is being worked out in your house when your neighbor comes to deliver you with a casserole. And you tell that neighbor, nice to meet you, but I don't exist as such as you think I do. And you'll get to know many me's. Don't freak out, please. But that's the nature of being. How that neighbor reacts, that is history being made there. People like to think that the office is like this sort of domestic, like urbanization of life, freeing, emancipatory for the independent woman or the capitalist guy. But no, the office is simply a new domestication, only with fewer amenities. Okay, you don't have like a nice comfortable sofa to like nap on in the working time. Comforts are removed on the basis of thinking that more productivity can be extracted from you if you're, the same concept that they had in the industrial age around factories. The person standing will be more productive because they will their body are in like active mode, and they cannot think about anything but producing, because their body is enacting this drive to produce. So making them sit down will make their mind think it's time to rest. No, we don't want any of that in a capitalist society. So office brings the veil of urbanization and emancipation, but it's more like a domestic kind of cage without the comforts of domesticity, without the pancakes and the sofas. And the problem with the feminist work is that it mostly has been taking place in the office by a certain kind of woman, and this kind of woman really wants to be a man. That's where I check out. I think the problem with associating the ideal to the oppressor is the fear that you might become the enemy, like you might become the oppressor, And unfortunately, we do see patterns of that actually happening and taking place. Women becoming despotic women. And so I think I'm for the paradigm shift. I'm for really embracing the Shakespearean proverb that life is a stage. Maybe people will, be less big-headed as well, because they'll be thinking, well, if, I'm not essentially this way, maybe there are stages in life where I might have to experiment a little bit and find somebody who I'm better suited to be. And that is why getting to know a neighbor is not something that happens for me in the first meeting, but is continually going to be happening again and again, every time. And a lot of food exchanges has to happen then. It can't just be like when I just move in, then we exchange the food and now we know each other. No, we need to keep getting to know each other, because you need to update your personality. This is obviously mostly an unconscious exercise, but the problem is, on the one hand, you have your unconscious progress as a fictional character, changing role, going back on yourself. That is the reality of your day-to-day experience. And then on the other hand, you have the belief that you're actually a fixed personality, and there the hypocrisy fallacy erupts and you get labeled as disingenuous, and that can really be scary to a neighbor who might want to forge an alliance with you over childcare, over looking after pets and possessions and making sure the house doesn't get robbed and things like that. How is the neighbor to know that you are not the robber, or even if you're not the robber now, that you will not become the robber due to some fluctuation in your personality that leads you in that direction, and you yourself cannot guarantee it? When I was getting to know my own neighbor, she came over with a she could tell that me and my family were not of this place. She could tell that we're not locals by a long shot, and so she wanted to introduce me to the system and how things work. And I feel she intended well to tell me how my personality might be jarring to the customs of the place that we lived in, how that maybe my family is a bit too loud, maybe we skip a little bit the small talk, and maybe this is a bit socially chafing to inhabitants surrounding us. And I said, don't worry, because how I am now, this is subject to change all the time. Not only that, but how you are is subject to change all the time. For all you know, after living next door to me for a year, you might abandon your small talk about the weather ways. And you might feel for the better for it. You might feel, okay, this is cool, adopting the style of this other culture. In fact, it will not be a decision in your life. You will not be thinking, okay, one day, how about I be more like Carolina next door, You'll not be thinking like that. But you'll be soaking in my mannerisms without even noticing. And I said, this is like unconditional bond that we have as neighbors. It's like family. We did not choose each other, but we are forced into a necessary alliance. And for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, we will probably cross-pollinate not only ideas and qualities and quirks, mannerisms as well. Not only exchange recipes, but we will also exchange expressions and the hand gestures and things like that. You're not safe, but neither am I from your quirks. And that's the beauty of these unconditional, thrown in together relationships, and how we learn to adapt as players in the life that is the stage. And this is important to recognize as the new paradigm is welcomed in, that the stage is not the town hall, not the meetings with the counselors, but your living room, as you invite guests and ask them to take off their shoes first. See how far that gets you in a society like this when you're somebody like me, right?